Awesome. So, I mean, since we're waiting to people to join in, I'll just go right ahead with explaining, the Kök project and also, what is the Agri-Food Connect, which could be also repetition for a lot of people who are joining to our other webinars. So we can, sometimes I realize that people actually join later on after I did that, sort of like a presentation. So I'll just dive right in. So today, this is our actually 10th version of the Agri-Food Connect. So we have Alessio with us today, which is I'm quite happy to having you with us today. So thank you so much for joining in.
No problem.
I'll just start over with the what is Kök Project and what is Agri-Food Connect and what's the whole deal about why are we doing these webinars. So in short, in a traditional sense, we are an accelerator that works only for agriculture, food, and water sector. We are an accelerator / corporate innovation partner working for only on the agri-food sector and working together with startups, companies, NGOs, and governmental organizations. What we do is that we cover all of these steps of the food value chain, and we work together with startups from the soil to the shelf, from the seed to the plate, all of these verticals that's part of the agri-food sector. We develop all of these acceleration programs. Our headquarters are based in Istanbul, Turkey, but we're quite active all across the MENA and FSU region, and we do have awesome local partners all across the world as well. So with the new normal, I mean, this is something that we keep saying, the new normal, the new food, the new agriculture, etc. We realize, why don't we, have this conversation, not just, as part of a one country or one ecosystem, but also turning into a global conversation and what is actually the new normal when you look at the agriculture and food sector, and what are we expecting in the future? And then we decided to, move ahead and, reach out all of these awesome people and start in that conversation, and let's just, start doing these webinars. So initially, the Agri-Food Connect is a virtual collaboration platform that features webinars such as like this, an online sprint that we are going to kick off in the upcoming, working together with startups and companies to basically adapt and develop their products and solutions directly into those companies' value chain. And then the next step, we'll be working together with those startups on an agile mentorship program where they will be get the chance to work directly on their business models, products, teams, services, growth, and marketing strategies. And in the last phase of it, we'll be focusing on training and also business development activities with the pre-acceleration program with those startups. And ideally, the whole thing is about basically creating an international collaboration with all of these startups to understanding they can actually scale, even if we're not moving between the countries. We can actually develop and adapt these solutions all across the world. So we decided to understand what is actually the new normal, and to do that we have to start it off the conversation around it and understanding, looking for insights and listening it from the experts, from the ecosystem players, and directly on their mouth, and understanding how startups can actually shape their work to the future. So if you would like to, stay on the loop, if you would like to, get to know about, what is Kök Project, what do we do, our newsletter, our reports, and all of this, cool stuff that we do, you can only just log into our website, which is kökproject.com. You can register our newsletter, and also you can join into our Slack group, which is Kök Community. It's free to join. It has a lot of, representatives, startups, and all the people, from the agri-food sector. So you can just, connect with them in there as well. So that being said, this is our 10th edition of the Agri-Food Connect, and we have the Alessio D'Antonio with us today from the Forward Fooding. He's the founder and CEO of Forward Fooding, which is one of the most awesome organizations that working on the FoodTech and the future of food. If it's a topic itself. And I would like to, pass the mic to you, Alessio, to explain, what are you guys working on? What is, Forward Fooding? And what are we going to, expect from the UK ecosystem and all of these, cool stuff that you guys are working on. So please go ahead.
Welcome. Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Sammy, for the really generous introduction. I'm not a guru myself. I'm just the founder of a company that is called Forward Fooding, which is actually the world's first collaborative platform for the food and beverage industry. We started off this journey a little over 5 years ago. Prior with another company, and now with Forward Fooding. So we've been around this space in the agri-food tech space for a while. But again, I'm far from being, you know, like the person who knows everything about food tech. What we try to do with For Fooding is really to enable collaborations between corporates and startups, primarily in Europe. Although we work with global companies, so we've mapped the whole global ecosystem, and we try to connect, you know, as many players as we can. However, most of our corporate clients are actually in Europe right now. But yeah, without further ado, I guess I can just share my screen and maybe tell a little bit more about the UK ecosystem, which for the sake of this webinar, I've been trying to focus on. But before I do that, let me know if you can see my screen as well.
Yes, we can. We can.
Fantastic. I'm just going to give you a quick deep dive into what we actually do as an organization. As I mentioned earlier, we work with corporates and startups to primarily serve one mission, which is to empower large organizations as well as investors with data, insight, and connections from our network to foster innovative collaboration that can create a brighter future of food. What this means in reality is we actually get briefs from some of our corporate clients, and we turn them into solutions that they're already available in the market, to which we can connect them to. Effectively, at the end of the day, we actually connect people, but we start from a need, you know, within large organizations, and then we drill it down into solutions that are available in the market, so that they don't need to reinvent the wheel, and they can actually leverage an open innovation to create, you know, those solutions. How do we do it? We are data driven, so over the years we have amassed a number of data points, particularly in regards to all the actors of the ecosystems, and I'll deep dive into that in a second. But we have now basically have mapped, you know, the whole agri-food tech ecosystem, and therefore since last year, actually, we've started licensing our data intelligence platform to both investors, organizations, and corporate entrepreneurs to really help them to make sense of the space themselves. So instead of just, you know, kind of telling them, you know, what we were seeing, we basically put all this data into one platform, and then giving them access to develop, you know, their understanding of the ecosystem. Then we do consulting. So as I mentioned earlier, if we work with a specific brief of organizations, whether it's a corporate or an investor, we will basically match, you know, the solutions that are available in the market according to what they're looking for. And last but not least, with our startup network, we actually run a number of events here in London and other parts of Europe to really get a connectivity layer to enable, you know, some of these collaborations. So it's mostly part of our community building efforts, but it's really about helping, you know, startups to get some value out of also engaging, you know, with our network. To deep dive into the Food Data Navigator, as I mentioned earlier, we basically monitor now about 6,400 ecosystem actors, including the startups. We have about now 3,800. The accelerators and incubators and ecosystem enablers, which would be organizations like ours, which up to date, we've mapped about 100-ish that actually focus on agri-food tech, as well as investors. And so when we talk about investors, we're including VC firms, corporate venture arms, as well as business angels. And we have now mapped about 2,300. And last but not least, actually corporate organizations and corporate venture capital. So all the large corporates that are operating across the supply chain, as well as all the venture arms that they might have set up to actually invest in early stage startups. And how we've done this is basically, it's been a journey, I have to say. You know, it started, as I said, about 5 years ago when I was trying to wrap my head around, you know, what even food tech, you know, was all about, and all these solutions that were popping up in the market. And it then, you know, kind of resulted into developing actually our own taxonomy, as we were increasingly frustrated about how, I guess, each generalist platform, data platform, was actually referring to specific technologies that were developed or specific solutions. So what we've done is over the years and through a number of iterations of building actually digital platforms, we've come up with these 8 macro categories, which we believe are quite representative of the whole agri-food tech space. And they are the ones here. So we go from ag tech through consumer apps and services, food delivery, food processing, but also food safety and traceability, next generation food and drinks, kitchen and restaurant tech, and surplus and waste management. And as I mentioned earlier, this has been an iterative journey in the sense that we have crowdsourced quite a bit of the data that we now have in our own databases. And so we have actually developed the taxonomy and the 150 technology meta tags by directly basically asking entrepreneurs how they would best, describe with meta tags and macro categories the solution that they were building. So effectively is the result of a number of iterations, or better yet, of meta tags that were submitted to us via our platforms from actually entrepreneurs. And this is how we constantly actually refine, our own taxonomy. Is an ongoing process. It kind of never stops. But the way we've actually input, this data into the platform is that we actually curate each single company by manually actually categorizing them using our own taxonomy. And then we enrich the data using data enrichers, so AI and automated tools, to basically enrich, the profiles of each actor of the platform with all the data that are available also on the web. And as I mentioned earlier, what we do also as part of our community building activities, we have now built last year we unveiled it, but it was set up a year before. In July 2018, we built London's first food and FoodTech innovation hub, and which now features 7 resident companies. We've run about 6 FoodTech meetups with about 1,000 attendees in total. And we constantly basically run workshops for serving our resident companies. This is an equity-free accelerator that we actually run to help also our resident companies to become corporate ready, but it's also the ideal space really where we can enable this type of interactions between corporates and startups. And now we're opening 2 other hubs after the summer, both in Rome and Barcelona. And last but not least, to really help startups to really get value out of our community, as I mentioned earlier, we've been working with Google for the past 3 years to actually curate every single product that goes into their canteens and cafeterias as far as consumer packaged goods are concerned. So what we've effectively done is basically introducing a number of new brands into their canteens and cafeterias for the UK and Ireland. And this has helped basically companies to tap into alternative sales channels. As we also believe that retail is changing quite fast and is becoming more and more tech enabled, and so we're all about trying to help companies to tap into alternative sales channels than the traditional, I guess, retail routes. And last but not least, last year also we launched what we call the FoodTech 500, which to be honest with you, was really our first endeavor to create a sort of a Fortune 500 for food tech. Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, we've seen so much innovation coming out of the space that we were like, where do we start, to giving visibility to some of these businesses? Yeah. And so what we tried to do is really come up with a list of 500 businesses that have applied to become part of it. And then we have used our own data intelligence to basically rank them, along also with the sustainability scoring, which we've added on top of our own internal scoring system. And last year, we were really pleased to receive more than 1,200 applications from 54 different countries across the 8 macro categories that I showed you earlier. And we're now actually working on the 2020 edition, which is set to be even bigger and more global. So nice. It's really exciting.
This is really awesome. I mean, I love that work. Honestly, I keep saying that, I know, but I think it was brilliant to basically create that opportunity for startups to apply and be featured in a global scale. But please go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you, Sammy. No. I mean, that was really it. That's what we do as a company. And as I said earlier as well, we actually have a number of partners and clients and supporters all over the world. and we actually like to blend them all into one place, as this is part of our community, really. But we wouldn't be able, to do all of the things that we've actually done so far if it wasn't also for our awesome partners, supporters, and clients. So these are just some of them. In some cases, as I mentioned earlier, we also work on data partnerships with a few organizations like ours that actually have a granular understanding of their local ecosystems, and how we basically, this is how also we keep up to date in our data about local ecosystems, as we would never basically be able to do it if they didn't share, the data about the local ecosystems themselves. But now, just to deep dive a little more into the UK, I know that Sammy, you asked me to kind of deep dive into it as we're based in London. I've tried my best, to get some data also from our data intelligence platform. But before I get into that, I just wanted to share what we actually define, or how we define, really food tech, just to make sure that everyone, gets some sort of stitchers, within we actually are going to operate today. Sure. But basically, as we're quite frustrated about not having a universal definition, of food tech, we've tried to basically work with some of our partners to come up with something that we were happy with. And this is kind of what we have come up with. So for us, food tech is the emerging sector exploring how technology can be leveraged to improve efficiency on the one end and sustainability on the other across the whole supply chain. So in designing, producing, choosing, delivering, and even enjoying food. And the reason why I pinpointed, efficiency and sustainability is because we think that they are intrinsically, relevant within the definition. Meaning, it's not that you cannot create efficiency with tech, which I guess it's the case, right? But we are trying to also understand how technology can actually improve sustainability, given all the challenges that our food system is currently facing. Right. So to kind of derive this definition into the real world is from farm to plate to fork to thoughts. And I'm actually here borrowing this definition from one of our partners, Chris, who was actually an investor in FoodTech. Basically, try to kind of come up with this definition and saying that now food tech actually touches also the world beyond the point of consumption, meaning from fork to thoughts, right? And you can see it, with all the consumer apps that we now, I guess, have available and we use, to get our food, or picking it up from a restaurant that might have not sold it, or interacting also on Instagram, with the food. So it goes well beyond, and the economy, I guess, behind it really goes, beyond what we, I guess, have heard for a very long time, which is from farm to fork, right?
Right.
And what this then again, means for, I guess, the supply chain and the whole, value chain is really that it goes, from farming to consumers, and food delivery, which is what I guess is the first thing that comes to mind when most people, talk about food tech. Right. Is just, one little piece of the whole, supply chain. And we believe that actually 99% of the real food tech opportunity doesn't lie, in food delivery. And you will understand what I mean by that, because when we're going to start deep diving into funding, you're going to see that, food delivery is the one that historically been attracting, the most funding. Right. But I guess, all the underdogs that are also now part of the FoodTech 500, really lie downstream and upstream, on the supply chain. But just to deep dive again into our own taxonomy here, and is all available also on our website. We're big fans of open sourcing, so you can see all the definitions of each single macro category, on our website. But just to give you an idea of what we're going to be talking about also when I'm going to start digging into the numbers, for ag tech, we define anything that has to do in technologies that aim at increasing farming efficiency and sustainability, including the use of field sensors, drones, farm management softwares, automated machinery, water and fertilizer management solutions, but also it includes, anything that has to do with novel farming techniques such as vertical farming, aquaculture, hydroponics, aeroponics, as well as insect breeding. And then, if I take kind of like the other extreme of the value chain, we can go into, things like next generation food and drink, which are solutions and processes that actually leverage science or technology to create new types of food and beverages. So here we will find things like, cell-based meat or plant-based alternatives or alternative protein, as well as other, products like meal replacements. This is what we would define, as next generation food and drinks. And really anything in between, as I showed you earlier, anything that really lies, within the whole supply chain.
Right.
And then what we've done here is we've basically, as I mentioned earlier, broken down these eight macro categories into 150 sub-technologies, which then makes it really easy for users to actually find what they're looking for. This is when it comes to actually using our own data intelligence platform. And here, what we've tried to do is really to breaking it down into very specific technologies such as, robotics or aquaponics or blockchain, which you can see that they kind of, overlaps, within some of the macro categories, right? So we've created a map tree that helps then users, to navigate the taxonomy. But this is basically how granular we can go when it comes to identifying, solutions that are already available in the market. But now let's deep dive into the UK. So historically, the UK has been an interesting place, I would say, for food tech. Since I moved here, which was about 5 years ago, I have to say that has changed a lot. I mean, food tech 5 years ago was kind of new. There were a few activities going on when it comes to community building, but it wasn't definitely, the place to be. London has been historically known for fintech and not really food tech, I guess. But over time, I have to say that it has received a lot of interest. And I think there are a number of reasons why, the ecosystem has evolved, quite quickly. And I think it caught up, with the rest of Europe quite well. And again, we'll see some numbers in a second. But just to give you like a very top and bottom overview, there are about 500 companies, active companies in the UK, out of which, and you can see here, the numbers 608 and 30 are actually combining, UK and Ireland, but is the whole ecosystem. So the rest of the players are basically investors or corporate venture arm or accelerators. And there are about 165 investors, which we've counted. We might have missed a few, but roughly speaking, these are the kind of numbers we're playing with. Since 2010, they've raised about, combinedly, the companies that are based in the UK, 1 billion, right, which is pretty much 1/4 of, a little bit more actually, the 1/4 than the rest of Europe. So, of what has combinedly, Europe has raised, again, if you take startups and scale-ups. Right. Which gives you also already, an understanding of how active, I guess, the ecosystem is, and how actually appealing to investors, it could be. Primarily because, the companies that are here are quite actually mature, and we'll get into that in a second. But just to give you also an idea of kind of like the picture that you're looking at right now, the percentage of startup funding information that we have available on this ecosystem is about 34%. So again, it's not really representative, right? But it gives you, I think, an idea of what's going on. What it basically means is that we have 35% of the information available within our data intelligence, but the remaining number of companies might have not actually disclosed how much they've raised. So this is just what has been disclosed over primarily Crunchbase and which are the two sources where we get most of the information from. And I would say Crunchbase is probably the most reliable for us. Then if we compare basically this with the rest of Europe, you can see that in terms of number of companies, United Kingdom, Israel, and France are basically the most active, and they count for about 70% of all active companies in Europe. Right. And they're just followed by Italy, who's slowly but surely, I think, catching up. When it comes to funding, then you can see that Germany comes first, but this is primarily due to outliers like Delivery Hero, and this is where we start getting into the food delivery conversation, which up to date has raised about 2 billion in funding, which if you look at, how much funding, the UK has raised as a country, is basically the same as Delivery Hero in the last, I think, 10 years or something. So again, if we don't count the outliers, however, UK is by far the most active, along with Israel, which is also a pretty interesting hotspot, for agri-food tech.
Absolutely.
When we go into the split by activity, here was basically to give you an understanding of the type of companies that I guess get in the UK. We can see that there is a bigger focus on the downstream technologies. So again, back to the slide that I showed you earlier about the whole supply chain, is basically products, food delivery, and consumer apps, and I guess a bit less, compared to the rest of Europe on ag tech.
Right.
But you can see that, for instance, next generation food and drinks, outperforms the rest of Europe. And this is where I think, when we talk about products, is where the UK is really developing an edge in terms of like plant-based, products, meat alternatives, dairy alternatives. The local consumers, I think, are quite open, to try new food. Right. And this really creates a playground, really, for entrepreneurs to experiment, with new products. And we've started seeing a lot of companies that have really cracked, the alternative protein, opportunity over here by creating, leading products. And again, we'll deep dive into some of those in a second. And as you can see here, this is just the split by activity. 76% of funding went to food delivery. Again, Deliveroo is based here. HelloFresh, if we count, them as well in the food delivery space, as they effectively, deliver meal kits. Again, they probably contribute, to this number. And then you can see that the rest is ag tech, consumer apps, surplus and waste management. This is also an interesting space. Again, we will see some of what we call the champions, in this space in a second. But there is definitely like a more activist, edge in the UK that a lot of entrepreneurs then tend to play on. And this is where I think quite a lot of surplus and waste management solutions, came about. Right. Again, when we deep dive into the numbers, also here you can see that there are a few outliers like Deliveroo. They've raised 1.3 billion up to date. Gusto is another one, similar to HelloFresh. They do meal delivery. They deliver actually meal kits. Just Eat with 66 million. Bioline AgroScience, which is in ag tech. Winnow, who is actually a company playing in the surplus and waste management, and a few others which I'm not going to touch on. But as you can see, these are kind of the biggest, the 10 most funded companies in the UK. And when it comes to represented technologies, so those 150 meta tags that I was describing earlier, I just basically said, as I said earlier, and I kind of anticipated, things like alternative protein is really taking off quite a bit of the whole chart. As you can see here, if you combine plant-based with the alternative protein and alternative ingredients, you basically get to almost 150 plus points out of 450. So you see that 1/3, goes into that, and this is really products. If you then add the vegan as well, which again there might be some flaps, here, but that's another, basically you take half of the chart, and then we get into things like data intelligence, decision support technology, food and drinks discovery, so things like Gusto, and food and drinks on demand, as well as free from, which is also an interesting category, I think, in the UK, especially in retail, where quite a lot of actually people have developed, products that are completely free from. So it's a growing, category within the UK. Really quickly to just give you an overview of some of the key players. Here I picked, just a few completely by chance. There is no particular interest for us, in showcasing one company or the other. But we think, they're representative of the ecosystem. Farm Drop is a company that actually delivers fresh produces directly to your doorstep. They do it basically by sourcing, products directly from farmers. And they also recently introduced delivery using the electric vehicle. So the whole idea behind the company is really to cut off, the middlemen and provide better, basically, products to end consumers by reconnecting them, to the farmers, or basically to where the food, comes from. We know, as I mentioned earlier, is one of what we call the waste heroes. These guys have developed actually a smart scale, which is the one that you see here on the bottom right of the screen, which basically weights up, the waste. What then they have added on top of it is actually this machine that takes thousands of pictures of the food that gets thrown away. And this basically helps the chefs to predict, how much are they wasting, and therefore what products they should be using to reduce waste. It's been really interesting to see how they've actually developed, their solution, because initially it was just a scale. Then they started adding, basically this hyperspectral, technology to really monitor, granularly the composition of the waste. And now, they've been running actually pilots with the likes of IKEA. They've got clients in the food retail sector, like Compass and many others, but also, they started working with ferries to really, basically very large, scaled kitchens where, food waste is a huge issue. Collective Food is an interesting one, is what we categorize into retail tech. What these guys have developed is a platform that actually cuts the middleman for restaurants. So they basically connect producers with restaurateurs by basically, eliminating all the middlemen. They've been growing really quickly. And the whole point really is to also showcase the storytelling behind, these products to the end consumers. And, via a digital platform, they actually allow also consumers eventually to see where the food that they actually eat in their plate, is coming from. Free F Bio is actually categorizing the food processing space. What these guys have developed is alternatives for animal feeding. So they create basically protein from plants that they use for animal feeding by upcycling waste. And it's actually quite interesting. They've raised also a significant amount of money, if I'm not mistaken. 24 million up to date. And they're one of the biggest actually in Europe doing this type of work. Mimica is actually in the food safety and food packaging space. What these guys have developed is actually a smart packaging. So this film that you see here applied on beef or milk, actually it triggers a biochemical reaction the moment it's actually applied on the surface. What this means is that effectively, to avoid food spoilage, which we know that in the food space is a huge issue, and there've been a few scandals around relabeling products that were actually expired. This chemical reaction effectively triggers a biochemical process that eventually will develop bumps that you can actually feel with your finger once the food is basically reaching the expiry date. So instead of effectively just relying on a sticker that anyone could put on the product, if they were to relabel the packaging, they can actually not do that if the product has bumps on that you can actually feel on the film of the packaging where it's applied. And they're basically using biotechnologies to create these films based on actually what you are putting the film on. So for meat, you need a specific formulation, right? That might be different, compared to milk. and this is really how they're going to go about tackling, you know, the food scandals, right, that have to do with food spoilage.
Right.
Then Almond is actually part of our Food Innovation Hub. They've developed a blockchain application that allows consumers to see the full traceability of the supply chain. What that means is when you scan basically the product with your phone, you are actually able to see basically each single ingredient, where it comes from. But also, most and foremost, they allow you to understand what is the CO2 that was emitted to create this specific product. And then they allow you to actually offset the carbon footprint that was generated by planting trees on your behalf. So it's a really cool company that they're you know, in their second year now, and they've already, I think, launched 4 different versions of their platform. But just to really find, you know, their market fit. And this is the latest one that they've, the one about setting, you know, their carbon footprint is the latest one they've released, and they're growing really, really fast, and it's a really exciting company, I think, to watch.
Nice.
Then this, touching based on what I was talking about earlier, about plant-based alternatives and alternative ingredients. Again, they fit into the next generation food and drinks. They've developed a range of products that are similar to chicken, but completely plant-based, including, you know, this, or what you're looking at, which is just chicken, you know, skewers. I think they've developed chicken nuggets and the first bacon, plant-based bacon.
Nice.
And last but not least, the Hummingbird Technologies. This is in the ag tech space. As I mentioned earlier, you know, UK is not, I guess, super big on ag tech, although we see that there are quite a few companies, including Hummingbird's Technologies. They've developed some remote sensing and artificial intelligence solutions that enabled effectively farmers to map their fields, as well as monitor them, you know, with smart technologies.
Nice.
And that's it. Just to give you also, to finish up on an overview of the ecosystem actors, there are quite a few accelerators over here that focus on food and food tech, including Mission Kitchen, Rebel Bio, Mission Ventures, EAT Food, which also has an office that covers the northern part of the UK, Green Lab, and Virgin Startup. You can see here some of the enablers in the food and food tech space, including us. Government organizations. Innovate UK is doing a tremendous job in helping actually financing also some of the R&D of some of the agri-food tech companies, as well as there are quite a few crowdfunding platforms that help these companies to then connect them with the investors community. And just to kind of wrap up, you know, some thoughts about how we envision really the European ecosystem to evolve, and you can take this as almost like signals of disruption of what is already happening. We see that quite a lot of businesses are transitioning from the traditional accelerator model, where, you know, you help as a private entity to accelerate, you know, private companies by taking equity. We see that there is a transition with equity to equity-free models, focusing on actually developing industry pilots and concrete collaborations between some of these companies and the corporates. We see that corporates are taking a lot more active role to work with accelerator programs, but also, you know, to really get involved, you know, in some of these conversations with startups, as opposed to kind of playing, you know, a more passive role, to a point where we started seeing, you know, companies that have set up, you know, their corporate venture arm in the US, now getting into Europe and actually opening up, you know, their branch over here. This is the likes of 301 Inc. by General Mills, or Coca-Cola with Web. But also we see that, you know, programs like Terra, which started in the US, and it was really kind of the first, you know, fully remote program that was aiming to create, you know, industry pilots between food and agri-tech companies and, you know, larger corporates, are now, you know, entering the Europe, and they're also going fully remotely. You know, COVID definitely helped, I guess, this transition, but
yeah,
they were.
Alicia, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. Okay.
I've just stopped sharing my screen,
okay,
so that maybe we have a little bit more bandwidth.
No,
Yeah.
the last sentence of yours, I think didn't go through, but the rest of it was in. So
Okay, I just said I'm hoping that this was enough to kind of give you an understanding of the ecosystem and where it's kind of heading to. But if there is any question, I'm more than happy to take them now, or just open up a conversation with you, Sammy, about it.
absolutely. I mean, it was excellent. Absolutely. I mean, it covers all of. I mean, big chunk of my questions. Before moving to my question, there's actually one question from the
Yeah.
audience I would like to read out. So Didem Masunlar asks, will or did the Brexit impact the investment in the food tech area in UK?
Really good question.
Yeah.
Should I reply? Should I reply straight away? So, to our knowledge, not really, I have to say. I mean, again, if we see that Brexit, the whole Brexit thing started about almost 2 years ago now, right?
Right.
I have to say that, again, looking at our data, we didn't see any sort of impact whatsoever. Or actually, yeah, the funding in agri-food tech companies actually increased over the years. So, I don't have a crystal ball, to predict whether it will, in the future. But I have to say that I think the UK, and in particular London, has this ability to attract, foreign investments. Meaning, most of the people that I think taken, money from investors, there is a really, international flow of capital over here, which also helped, I guess, kind of hedging, a little bit. On the other hand, I think London is really resilient. Therefore, most of the businesses that have been based here probably haven't really moved anywhere. At least startups and scale-ups.
Right.
Just because there are also quite generous incentives for investors to invest in UK businesses. I mean, there are some government schemes that allows you to effectively claim some money back when you invest in risky businesses, namely startups, especially if they're in their earlier or early stage. And this combined with actually all the efforts that also the government's put in place for supporting R&D through the likes of Innovate UK, I think really makes it a fertile ground for startups to stay. So in short, we haven't really seen a big impact. If this will happen in the future, I think the retail world, the food retail world, will definitely going to get hit by COVID and Brexit. And we've started seeing that already. But I don't think actually food tech will be impacted that much.
Which is I think the Brexit is always the elephant in the room when you talk about the UK ecosystem, right? I mean, it's always there, and it's always part of that, the big conversation about how London will become that, food tech hub, the agriculture tech hub, while this is happening. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely the most, I think, the most ripe ecosystem regarding the food tech. Didem actually adds another question. Let me read that out as well. I think some large companies moved their R&D centers from the UK to the locations in Europe in the past few years. Is this creating a new opportunity to startups from a talent pool point of view?
Really, really good question. So yeah, we've seen the likes of Unilever, moving their headquarters to Rotterdam, and I think a few others, follow suit. But I mean, access to talent, I can tell you, is the biggest challenge for any, I think, startup in the UK and in London in particular. As in any other, I think, really active and thriving ecosystems, right? I mean, fintech here is huge, and I guess a good chunk of the, tech talent really gets automatically and kind of like naturally, attracted by those type of sectors. But I mean, is this creating new opportunities? I would like to think yes, it is. And in our experience, even with the companies, within our innovation hubs, they've been hiring, successfully scientists and people, with tech with very technical, background.
Right,
So
right.
I would say that probably there is less of a shortage now that, large companies of the likes of Unilever, moved their headquarters. If this is set to continue, I'm not sure. And this is, again, kind of going back to the Brexit, I guess, conversation, as I have started seeing that, quite a lot of people that used to see London as a kind of destination, for career development, especially, if they were coming from, I guess, outside of Europe. Now, if they really start introducing, this rigid sort of like requirements, for you to enter, the country with visas and all of that, then it might become less appealing.
Right.
But so far, I wouldn't say that it has had a very big impact.
It's all, I mean, it's definitely it's a developing situation, because like when you compare, because I remember from our session with Mathieu recently from Digital Food Lab, he was mentioning, so he was mentioning a lot about like one of the missing points when you talk about, food tech in Paris, in France, but in Paris specifically, the location. So for startups to actually just for food tech startups to meet and work together. You guys covering that in London and in Rome and in Barcelona in the upcoming, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys are actually the first one who are opening up a physical space just for food tech startups, not as part of an accelerator, but the whole thing is just about that, for food tech startups, which is quite exciting. I wanted to actually, slowly asking that question, like, what is the impact that you see to have, such physical space on the for the startups? Like, is it positive, or is it just natural? Like, because it's totally different thing to have just like a regular co-working space. It's just a physical space to all of these startups to meet up, but just on the food tech. So how was your experience with that, Huckle Tree?
Yeah. So this has been great, I have to say, but primarily for the companies who are part of it and all the other companies that kind of gravitate around it. I mean, we've been trying to, from the very beginning, to create a very open space. Quite big now. There are about 500, or there used to be before COVID, about 550, I think, people that were actually coming. So it's fairly small. But the networking opportunity that there were, collaboration opportunities that we're able to create among each other's resident members were actually incredible. I mean, this is the biggest value that they actually get. That combined also with the greater ecosystem of companies that are actually part of the physical space, meaning there are just digital agencies, there are social media experts that freelance, out of the space. So if you need, someone or an extra help, pair of hands to do a specific task, you basically have it in one place. So that, is incredibly beneficial. We have created a media studio within the space where companies can do their daily social media. So they can take pictures, they can shoot videos and all this kind of stuff. We have a podcast studio as well, which again can be rented by the hour. So that helps, to create content as well. But then the larger, I guess, network of companies that we've built and is now gravitating, around the space is kind of like more virtual. As at this point, it's completely virtual because of COVID. But it used to be a lot more physical as we were running monthly food tech meetups. So we were inviting effectively the foodies and the techies to come together, ideally to basically create, new companies at the intersection of food and technology. And that we were doing that really to bridge that gap of accessing, tech people if you have, I guess, a food background, and vice versa, right? If you're a tech person and you want to start a company in the food space, but you don't know where to start from because you don't know the dynamics of the industry, then we were basically running these food tech meetups, which have now gone virtual, to basically, really create a hyper connectivity layer. So I think, there are definitely benefits of running, a physical space, primarily for the companies, that walk through the doors every day. But also, I mean, in regards to connecting them, with corporates, we've seen a lot of actually clients of ours, or even, clients that we've helped, on just engaging with some of the companies that are part of our innovation hub, having, a physical space gives them a lot of more confidence, I think, in really going and meeting with these people and creating, these relationships that can lead, to long-term partnerships. So that element has helped us, a lot. But then again, I think it boils down to finding also the right human fit, and the right match between the entrepreneurs and the corporate executives when it comes to creating, partnerships between large corporates and entrepreneurs.
Absolutely. I mean, it just reminds me one of the questions that I heard last year in an event, which I find it like quite, thought-provoking. And the question was that I was part of a panel session with, representatives from different accelerators. And the question was quite direct that, why do we need accelerators? And that was like, all four, food accelerator, representatives were like, but the idea of it, as you mentioned, it's the sense of community, sense of being part of something, sense of knowing that any of the questions that you would have, or any, thought-provoking situations that you might have in that physical space or a virtual space now, it's just rewarding. And for you to understand that how you can actually scale that and turn that into a more profitable business or more impactful business, like whichever that you aim for. And I think, as you mentioned, having that sort of like a physical spaces, I think it's just, brilliant to do so. With this way, you create that connection within. I wanted to just move a bit to your perspective, because we talk a lot about, the ecosystem, we talk about startups, we talk about the data, the numbers, the VCs, etc. But what is your thoughts? So what do you envision when we talk about the future of agri-food sector? What is your your gold coin that you would put in as top topics to be worked on regarding the agri-food sector in the future?
Wow, it's a $1 million question.
Absolutely it is.
Only $1 million questions are allowed at this point. I would say, I mean, there are many areas where I see a lot of opportunities. As I mentioned earlier, I think, the real FoodTech opportunity lies in the 99% of the whole supply chain. Food delivery, I think, is the one that most people talk about, but I think AgTech, is super exciting, and we see that there is a lot of development, on that front. Not only because I think farmers are becoming more ready, really, to embrace some of these solutions, but also because the market is just, a lot more in need, of tech. So. Again, COVID, I think, has been an incredible, reality button. I think they've hit, the reality button really, really loud in terms of like highlighting, how fragile, the supply chain is, as well as, how old some of these practices are. And so, as much as, you want to kind of, stick to doing the things the old way, I think, companies, especially, very large organizations, really need to change the way they look at innovation, right? Not only from a process standpoint, but also from the type of tools that they actually use, to enable innovation. So if I were to bet, I guess, on the three biggest things, I would say AgTech, and in particular, I think precision farming. So anything that has to do with, hyperspectral technology, drones, and field mapping, and sensors, I think, are going to be really big. I've started seeing a few companies deploying automated robots on fields with incredible results. And this is also going back to what I was mentioning about how agriculture businesses can really change the way they look at innovation. Is also from a business model perspective, right? Companies who make tractors, I think, at some point might be completely, swiped away from companies who actually rent, robots only when you need it to perform specific tasks, including, seeding or mapping or whatever. Yeah. But then, it's a completely different business model. So that if you were to adapt as a tractor manufacturer, right, it's a big shift. So absolutely, you need to figure out, whether you're ready and you're willing to do that.
Yep.
The second one I would say is probably alternative protein is an obvious one, but again, I think COVID has just accelerated massively, you know, the adoption from consumers. And I can see that the market, you know, is craving, you know, for new options.
Right.
Meat, you know, I guess has been the meat industry has been the one that has been hit the most, you know, with all sort of also I guess scandals or critics, you know, that have received again also during the COVID. And so, you know, readapting there I think is going to be key. I mean, I've seen a few companies like Vivera, you know, successfully transitioning from selling 100%, you know, meat to completely, you know, switching their supply chain to plant-based food. So, you know, is doable. I guess it takes, you know, willingness and of course, you know, they need to want to do that, you know, but I think it's possible. And so, you know, as the consumers, you know, demand for more plant-based alternatives, I think there's definitely, you know, a huge opportunity there to be played, along with actually soil agriculture. I think I think we're getting ready to start to see products that are going to hit the market probably in the next year or so, that are completely, you know, lab grown, or, you know, artificially, if you will, made. I guess in the US, it might be easier for us to introduce them because of legislation. Then they're gonna slowly but surely, you know, get to Europe. And then last but not least is the waste issue. So anything that, any solution that is upcycling, you know, ingredients from byproducts, and we've seen, you know, quite a few of those, or, you know, repurposing, I guess, waste to create animal feeding, or, you know, anything like that, I think is going to really have a big impact in the future. Also because, again, it's pushed by consumers. In particular, when I think about consumers and how they actually relate to the food waste issue, I also see a lot of solutions that are coming out on the market in plastic alternatives. So leveraging algae to develop, you know, a new biodegradable or even compostable, you know, packaging. Mushrooms has been huge, and actually developing, you know, new packaging solutions. But also, as I mentioned earlier, you know, really using algae to actually attack plastic and turn it into new products. You know, whether it's for the textile industry or the feeding industry. We started seeing a lot of like smart technologies, you know, in that space, and I think it's just going to accelerate massively because, again, it's also all over the news, and consumers are becoming a lot more, I think, aware and conscious about it.
Excellent, absolutely excellent. I mean, that's I think one of the key words about the future of food regarding that, because the consumer demand is just highly changing to the perspective of not just, you know, responsible sourcing, but also, you know, tracing back where it's coming from, who's been producing it, how clean was it, and what was the situation regarding the, you know, the food safety, can we track it back, and the impact of it to the nature. And I think that's also, you know, that's a great point, because that's also the changing the perspective of the startups and understanding how they can actually move forward with it. Perfect, absolutely perfect, Alicia. So
Thank you,
I think
Sammy.
these were my questions. So and I think we are, you know, out of time as well. But is there anything you would like to add as a sign off? Any cool stuff that you guys are working on? Any of the publishments or any of the, you know, the work that you guys doing? You would like to, you know, plug in?
Well, I guess, as you said, you're a big fan of FoodTech 500. We're working right now actually on the new edition of it. It's looking to be really exciting. We're going to make a few announcements, I guess, next month. But I would say, I mean, if you haven't checked it out yet, you can go on forwardfooding.com/FoodTech500 and see the whole list. Is absolutely available for free, you know, to access. As well as once you then deep dive into each single actor, we also showcase each single SDG that the solutions are contributing to, which we also think, you know, are really important. And we see that even in the investment world, you know, they've been actually used quite a lot now for every portfolio company to showcase to investors, you know, while you know, this business are doing well, also how good they're doing, to the planet and to really cracking, the sustainability issue. And I think, that's really, I think, a note that I would love to close it on. I think, food tech and ag tech are really set to become the enablers, of more efficiency and sustainability. And I'm really excited about seeing, all these other, innovations that are popping up, in the market across the world, because I don't think innovation has any boundary. So it's really exciting, to be playing, I guess, a role, in this space, and also how you guys are doing it. And I'm really looking forward, to connect also more with your also regions to see if there are any, also other opportunities of connectivity that we can enable, because that's really our role eventually.
Absolutely. Awesome. I mean, we're definitely looking forward. I'm really looking forward to the new edition of that, FoodTech 500. And I think, again, like I keep saying that, but I think that's a brilliant work, man. And all of the stuff that you do is like pretty cool, but like that specifically, I love that work. So, I mean, thank you so much, Elizio. I mean, thank you so much, Elizio.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure, absolutely. So for people attending and also the watching later on, you will be able to find the recording of this webinar in our YouTube channel on Kök Projekt, and you can also log into our YouTube channel as Kök Projekt and find the other sessions that we do as well. And if you would like to reach out or to Elizio, as he mentioned, you can log into forwardfooding.com and just look all the cool stuff that they do. So thank you so much, Elizio, for joining us today, and thank you everyone for joining us as well, and have an awesome evening and great week. So take care.
Thank you, Sammy. Thank you everyone for joining in.
Same
Cheers.
Cheers. Take care.
Take care.